Micromanagement is one of the fundamental skills in an RTS game, and how it's handled varies from player to player. Today, I'll be showing you how I micro in Rise of Nations. The first topic I discuss is control groups. If you are not familiar with control groups, basically you can create a hotkey for units or buildings by pressing Ctrl and any single digit number. You can also use the F keys. So if I select my villager, hit Ctrl+1, now I can select this villager by pressing 1 and also move the camera focus to this villager by pressing 1 twice. Control groups are vital for many situations, starting from control grouping the scouting villagers at the start, to control grouping all the different production buildings and military unit groups later on. How I use them is the following. Number 1 is the first scouting villager early on and all barracks later. Number 2 is second scouting villager and later on all stables. Number 3 is third scouting villager early on, or first auxiliary army later on. Number 4 is my fourth scouting villager early and second auxiliary army later, or all docks or all air bases. Number 5 is my Patriot, and number 6 is all spies. Number 7 and above are too clunky to use for most things, so I don't. Notice that I don't control group my main army, that is because it's constantly changing in size. There is a way to add newly created units to an existing control group if you put the rally flag of your production buildings on a unit that is part of said group. For example, you could control group your main army, including the Patriot, put the rally flag on the unit that is least likely to die, in this case your Patriot, and the newly created units will be part of your main army control group until your Patriot dies, because then the rally point is pointing at nothing. I don't use this feature because I like to move my Patriots separately from my main army, but this is entirely up to preference. I also don't think my control groups are the most optimized, since some of them actually overlap, but you can set up your own based on your own wishes. Moving on to second topic, which will be basic unit commands and stances. Other than directly clicking on targets, you can use attack move or patrol to make your army attack anything that it closely encounters. These are good methods to fight if you don't want to control your units directly. Keep in mind your units will also attack random buildings if there are no units nearby, so use with caution. Regarding army stances, for me the two most important are aggressive for when I'm fighting and stand ground for when I'm not fighting. I use hotkeys to switch between these two stances when I need to. I don't use hotkeys for the other stances, but sometimes I use raid stance for units when I want them to target villagers. Defensive for small army groups that are guarding a specific spot. And no attack stance if I don't want my ranged cavalry raiders to fire shots too early. The third topic for this video is going to be what I call abusing quirks of the game. One of these is using block micro. Rise of Nations has pretty smooth movement for the most part, but you can still use your unit's collision box to obstruct the enemy unit's path. Use this to your advantage by surrounding archers with a group of melee units, so you get more hits in, as well as making it harder for them to run away. Use forced march to get ahead of enemy units and attack them from two angles. Bring your units in front of the enemy caravan before hitting it, so it can't escape. I also need to mention perhaps the most annoying trait of Patriot units. I don't know the exact reason why, but when Patriot units' path is blocked by something, and they try to turn away, their turning speed becomes incredibly slow. You can abuse this by blocking the enemy's Patriot with units and sniping it. Another such quirk is unit attack animations. Every unit plays an attack sequence when ordered to kill something, but for many units, the actual damage is dealt at the beginning of the attack sequence, not at the end. This means you don't have to wait for the attack sequence to finish. Let's take the example of knights. Here are some enemy villagers trying to run away, and I use my knight to hit. Then right after the damage is dealt, I start moving the knight ahead of the villager again, skipping much of the attack sequence graphics. This gives me a leeway to hit the villager for a second time faster than usual, because after the attack animation, I would have to catch up to the villager to get the second hit in. Taking another example with a bowman against a merchant running away. The arrows are fired at the start of the attack animation, so I move my bowman right after the arrows are let loose to catch up on the distance between the two units. This can sometimes mean the difference between the merchant dying and the merchant getting into garrison safely. The fourth topic I wanted to talk about is avoiding projectiles. Every projectile in this game has a certain travel speed, so it is unlikely to avoid faster projectiles like gunpowder or crossbow bolts. This is actually the reason crossbows are better than heavy archers in practice. For normal archers and garrisons in pre-gunpowder ages, the projectiles are slower and can be dodged with good micro. Basically, the logic for projectiles hitting moving targets is the game predicts where the target unit is going to be based on its current movement. So if you move your unit in a different direction after the projectile is released, you will avoid getting hit. Now, of course, in multiplayer games there is some input delay, so timing this perfectly is not an easy task. The fifth topic is going to be hit and run micro. This is most commonly used when defending against raids or siege. You can garrison units in and out of buildings. This makes most production buildings a safe house for your units. When the opponent is sieging you, usually they want to avoid rushing in too early because they don't want to be hit by city and tower fire. This gives you time to send archers out, fire a couple of volleys and run back into safety. You have to be careful about this because sometimes hit and running with your archers might prompt your opponent to rush in with his army when you are actually vulnerable to an all-out attack. Also, some players preemptively put their ranged units in front to avoid being hit and run like that. This means if they have more archers than you, trying to hit and run will damage your units more than theirs. Now that we've covered microing basic military units, let's move on to specialized units, starting with spies. First of all, I recommend opening the settings and turning use abilities as group off. This will allow you to select all your spies and click on enemy units one after another, because only one spy will attempt bribery on one target instead of the whole group targeting one unit. Personally, I use this method, but if you want to take it one step further, you can use control groups for each individual spy, and going through them, quickly pressing the numbers and clicking the enemy units. The best unit to counter spies is the scout, because when put in a good place, they will automatically target enemy spies to kill them. So when both spies and scouts are present on the battlefield, the player with spies will want to bribe enemy units. Then the other player will want to move the targeted units back and bring the scouts forward to kill the spies, to which the first player can respond with pulling the spies back and using ranged units to snipe the enemy scouts. So it's all about trying to predict what your opponent will do and doing the proper counter move. Another important specialized unit is the Patriot, because they give armor bonus and various other benefits to your army. Paying attention to the Patriot is important at all times, because you want the Patriot to be close enough to your units so everyone receives the armor bonus, but you don't want to be too close, because that runs the risk of losing your Patriot to the enemy units. There is also a tactic to use the Patriot as bait. Since it's such an important unit, putting it in an exposed position might prompt the opponent to try and snipe it. And with good timing, you can pull the Patriot to safety, then the enemy units will be chasing a unit that they can't reach and eventually lose the fight. I think that covers most land units. Let's move on to ships. On maps like Watering Hole, it is very important to pay attention to your ships. The control for water can be won just by having better micro. Pay close attention to the weak ships and pull them back to safety. Use the fast light ships to chase after damaged enemy ships or fishermen and finish them off. Use your fire ships on clumped up heavy ships for maximum damage output. Avoid having your own heavy ships be blown to pieces by blocking enemy fire ships with your light ships. So that's all I have to say for this video. Thank you very much for watching and have fun microing your way to victory.